Ever think about how web apps store all that data? Like, where does it all go?
It's all about databases, really.
Right. And today, we're taking a deep dive into SQLite with PHP.
A really solid combo, especially if you're just starting out with databases.
Totally. We found this awesome article from plus2net.com packed with code snippets you can actually use.
Yeah, it's like a practical guide, not just theory.
Exactly. So SQLite, it's not like those massive server farms.
No, think of it like the Swiss Army knife of databases.
Yeah.
Lightweight,
Wow.
fast, perfect for smaller projects.
Love that. No need to overcomplicate things when you're just starting out.
Exactly.
Now, this article dives into inserting records, which basically means adding new data to your database. And there's this thing called last inserted. Sounds kind of technical.
It's actually pretty straightforward and super useful. Imagine you're building a forum, right?
Okay, got it.
And someone posts a new comment. Last inserted swoops in and gives you a unique ID for that comment the instant it's added.
Oh, I see. So each comment gets its own little identifier.
Exactly. Think of it like a fingerprint. No two comments will ever have the same one.
Makes sense. So you can keep track of everything, even if two comments are exactly the same.
Exactly. Without it, things would get messy fast.
Chaos. And speaking of organization, the article talks about unique IDs and primary keys. Are those like the VIPs of the database world?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Each row in your database is like a guest at a party. The primary key is their invitation,
Okay, I like where this is going.
and it's usually the ID column. Make sure no two guests have the same invitation.
So it's all about keeping things organized, making sure everything has its place.
Exactly. Now, in SQLite, there's also something called a RAWD. It's automatically generated for each new record, even if you don't set up a primary key.
So it's like Squall has a backup plan if we forget the invitations.
Pretty much. It tries to keep things tidy.
Smart.
Yeah.
But why do we even care about primary keys or RAWDs?
Imagine you're building an online store. You need to keep track of each product,
Right, like what it is, how much it costs.
and link it to the right orders. Primary keys and RAWDs make all that possible. They're the unsung heroes.
Wow, so they really are the backbone of the whole system.
You got it.
Okay, so we've got our trusty ID system,
Yeah,
but how do we actually get this new data into the database?
that's where the insert query comes in.
Insert query sounds kind of official.
It's like sending a message to the database. Hey, I've got some new data here. Add it to this table.
Like slipping a note to the librarian. Put this in the card catalog, please.
Exactly. The article has a great example using a student database.
Oh, so like their name, what class they're in, all that.
All those details go into the insert query.
And then boom, new student record.
Just like that. Of course, you want to make sure no one's tampering with your data.
Oh, right. We don't want any unexpected students popping up in the system.
Exactly. And that's where we get into SQL injection attacks
Uh-huh.
and how to prevent them. But maybe we should save that for after a quick break.
Yeah, let's hold that thought. We'll be right back. So before the break, we were talking about adding new entries into our SQLite database with PHP, but we kind of left things hanging on how to keep our data safe. We don't want any digital mischief, right?
Right, you're talking about SQL injection attacks, a very real danger. It's like leaving the back door to your data wide open.
Exactly, like leaving a welcome mat for the bad guys. But good thing this article we're looking at has a solution. Parameterized queries. Sounds a bit intense though, right?
The name might sound like something out of Star Trek, but they're actually pretty clever. Imagine you have a form on your website.
Okay, like a sign-up form or something.
Exactly. With parameterized queries, you're not directly inserting whatever the user types into your SQL query. You use placeholders.
Placeholders. So like instead of writing the actual data, we're using what, like blanks?
You got it. Think of them as empty containers. And then there's this function bind param. That's where the magic happens.
Okay, so this bind param, it fills in the blanks.
More like it labels them. This container is for the user's email, this one's for their name, and so on. The important part is that the database sees it all as data, not as code.
Ah, so even if someone tries to slip in some sneaky code, the database is like, nope, not falling for that.
Exactly. It's like having a bouncer at the door, checking IDs very carefully.
Love that analogy. So we're keeping things safe and organized, but the article also mentioned that parameterized queries make our code cleaner.
Yeah, it's like organizing your code. Makes it easier to read and understand.
So it's a win-win. More secure and easier on the eyes.
Speaking of efficiency, what if we want to add a bunch of records at once? You're not going to like the answer if you have to do it one by one.
Huh. No, that would be a nightmare.
Yeah, luckily, parameterized queries are great for this. Remember those arrays we talked about earlier?
Yeah, like lists of data, right?
Right. We can use parameterized queries to insert data, from an array directly into our database, all in one go.
Wow, that's powerful. Like a bulk upload.
Exactly. No need to write 100 different queries when one will do the trick.
So efficient. It's like magic.
But what about our friend last inserted? Does it still work with multiple records?
Absolutely. You often need those unique IDs, even for bulk inserts, and last inserted is still your go-to. Fantastic. Okay, so we've covered inserting records, keeping them safe, even adding a bunch at once. But the article mentioned one more thing, auto increment. Is that as cool as it sounds? So before the break, we were diving into this idea of auto increment. Sounds pretty futuristic, IDs just like assigning themselves.
It's a really handy feature, especially when you're just starting out. Imagine you have a column for user IDs.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
With auto increment, you don't have to manually give each new user an ID. SQLite does it for you, automatically.
So it's like a self-numbering machine, saves a lot of hassle.
Exactly. Each new record gets the next number in line. But here's a thought.
Yeah.
What happens when you delete a record? Say, user number 5 decides they're done with your app.
Ooh, yeah, good question. Does that ID just vanish?
Well, with auto increment, SQLite likes to keep things moving forward. So even if user 5 is gone, their ID is retired.
Retired, you mean?
The next new user wouldn't get ID number 5 again, it'd get the next available number.
Okay, so the ID isn't reused, like retiring a jersey number in sports.
Exactly. Makes things cleaner in the long run. But what happens if you don't use auto increment?
Good question. Is it chaos?
Not quite chaos. The article gives an example. They add 2 records, then delete one. And without auto increment, SQLite might decide to reuse that deleted ID.
Interesting. So it's trying to be efficient, right? Not waste any IDs.
Exactly. And for some applications, that makes perfect sense.
But for others, it could cause issues.
Right. Think about it. Assigning a new student the same locker number as someone who's left the school.
Yeah, that could cause some mix-ups.
Exactly. So deciding whether or not to use auto increment really depends on what you're building. If you need a super clear, unbroken history, you probably want it.
Right, like with financial transactions or something like that.
Exactly. But for something simpler, like a list of blog posts, it might not matter as much.
It's all about picking the right tool for the job. Now, the article briefly mentioned something else. Inserting your own ID, even with auto increment on. Is that not allowed?
It is possible, but I'd tread carefully there.
Oh, that.
The main reason to avoid it is that it can create gaps in your ID sequence.
Gaps. What do you mean?
Let's say you manually insert a record and give it ID number 5.
Okay.
But the next auto increment ID is supposed to be 6. You end up with a gap.
I see. So it's like skipping a page in a notebook.
Exactly. And for some applications, that might not matter. But if you're relying on that ID sequence for anything, those gaps can cause issues down the line.
This has been a really fascinating look into SQLite and PHP. We've gone over so much from basic inserts to this whole world of IDs and auto increment.
It's all connected, really. Understanding these pieces helps you build more robust and reliable applications.
Absolutely. And the best part is, this article gave us some great examples to learn from. Our listeners can take this and start experimenting right away.
Exactly. And if you're ready for an even deeper dive, here's something to think about. When would you not want to use auto increment? Even when it seems like the easy button.
Ooh, great question. It's all about those trade-offs, right? Really understanding the needs of your project. Well, on that note, we'll wrap things up. Until next time, happy coding.